Hi again. I wanted to do a follow-up from the previous video because the main inspiration I found in wanting to do the video about the signs and symptoms of C-PTSD in an everyday context was because I wanted to connect it onto how it can also be exploited in an everyday context, which we may not realize or see, whether you are the person that suffers from CPTSD or you are the person that knows someone with CPTSD and you may be unknowingly exploiting boundaries or so on. It's a situation that I find myself in, and it really awakened my thought quite recently. So it kind of felt like something that I needed to discuss further, and I wanted to share it. Now, of course, this isn't just me talking about CPTSD. CPTSD is obviously what I have. So while I speak about what I face and endure, it's something where I feel it happens overall in the prospect of mental illness, which is something that is very sad and really needs to be eradicated, in my opinion. But before I go into it, I do really want to just sort of put out there that while I am obviously speaking about stuff such as boundaries and ways in which our boundaries can be exploited for CPTSD or mental health sufferers, is I really want to just sort of give a heads up about potential trigger warnings, because I'm going to be sort of expanding about relationships in every context, and with me sort of going into detail, I feel like it's the best thing that I could do to sort of give a heads up so anyone that's viewing this is emotionally prepared. But to start off, one thing that I feel in reasons why these situations can happen, sometimes I feel it happens consciously, to be brutally honest, and sometimes I feel it is quite subconsciously or accidental, in my opinion. And I think it's quite interesting the time in which we are existing in. I don't necessarily mean in relation to the pandemic or what's on in the news, but I more or less mean in relation to, we have generations where mental health was very stigmatized and where it required a lot of legal breakthroughs for it to be recognized and to be probably treated with the right amount of respect, and where people that did suffer from mental illness was also treated with the right amount of healthcare as well. So we've got that generation. We have also within that generation, we also have what people like associate to PTSD, in relation to those that have suffered natural disasters, war veterans, and I will expand that context to anyone that has endured a type of trauma for a period of time, or whether it is from a prolonged period of time. And you have got, yes, you've got those generations as well. You've got the generation where there is awareness on mental health, but it is the time where there is very little support, or support is only just being founded when it comes to mental health. So I am talking about the generation from the 60s and a little bit before and a little bit after as well, where many charities was just starting to be set up, and some of the ones that was already set up did not have the full scope where it could be open to everyone in the way that it could be today. And you've also got my generation where whether it's from the late 80s, early 90s, to mid and so on, you have the generation where we are seeing a change in the way how mental health and mental illness is treated in today's society. And for that, it's something that I feel very fortunate to be part of. I feel very fortunate in that being part of it in this time means that I myself are able to access mental health services that previous generations or people that I know may not have been able to. It also makes me feel fortunate in that having lived in this particular time right now, it also means that I have been granted the validity to speak about it much more openly than previous generations as well. But the sad point is, and this is where the trigger warning is really sort of crucial and needed, is the generations before, where if we're talking about whether it's people in positions of power, so if it is within a work context, we can also look at it within the family dynamic, cultural, gender, sexuality. There is excuse me, there's many sorts of breakdowns in the position of power and how that has been reinforced. Now, even though it does sound like it is a separate point, it's something that is very poignant to this issue, because one thing that I have come to realise when it has come to the history of mental illness is the fight for it to be treated and seen as equal to any other type of person that does not suffer from a mental illness, but also any other health condition as well. And with that, it's also come from a lot of suffering and quite a lot of pain as well from those who have not been able to be granted with the same amount of fair treatment. So I think it's obviously something that is quite a sad reality when it does come to C-PTSD and of course obviously other mental health illnesses as well. But yes, sadly, yes, you have relationships, and all of these can overlap at the same time as well, which can be very draining as well. You can have it within the family dynamic. So of course I speak about how things have changed based on generation, and when I spoke about my DigiFest presentation, I spoke about generational trauma and with how that can look in relation to C-PTSD is having feelings being gaslit, having the validity removed. And one thing I definitely notice is okay, to sort of say the cliche, we are obviously creatures of habit, and a lot of the time within family dynamics, how people are taught obviously goes down a generation. And while I'm not saying this to speak about my own experiences, my own experiences with my parents, it's something where I feel that it exists when it comes to the validity to trauma based on what was society excuse me societally accepted in this time compared to before, or from whatever time to whatever generation before, and so on. So it can, of course, whether it's about legal issues, whether it is about people we may want to marry or so on, or just overall the right to claim emotions is something that exists. And that is something where, of course, it can really take hold in family dynamics and even discussions about mental health within family, and even discussions within doing work to keep on making sure that, how can I say, that we are aware of everyone's boundaries and everyone's no-go areas, and making sure that we approach relationships as an active, growing thing. I think that in itself, within the family dynamic, is quite a new concept, and it's one where a lot of families are still bringing that into their dimensions and worlds now. I spoke about legal. I didn't speak about legal, but it's coming to mind right now. But this can also exist legally, of course, if you have particular things that aren't fully coming into practice, or regulations aren't fully brought in, then it can exist. So we've had it in gender rights, we have it in we have it in gender rights and gender identity. We have it within sex workers, like rights for sex workers is a huge one as well. And there is many of these things that happen and continue to happen so frequently and so tragically as well. And there can be an aspect of ridicule based on how the legal system is at the time, and whether it's up to date based on the time. So you obviously have crimes of stalking, you have crimes of sexual violence, you have crimes of divorces. When it comes to divorces and separations, there is, of course, rights when it comes to land, housing, so on. And it's a difficult one to say how the legal system can exploit it, but what I can definitely say is the lack of progression within certain legal issues can be a way how those that are suffering from mental illness end up being further marginalised. And I'm just sort of thinking about other contexts of this as well. So I've done work, done social within friendships. In fact, actually, I don't feel that I have done that enough. So I want to talk about that for a little bit. So within friendships, of course, this is where it's really interesting, because obviously imitation is a thing that exists to how we sort of find and develop and nourish our own identity. But then within that, when it comes to friendships, and it can be very similar to romantic relationships as well, is that the tone of support when it can come to certain experiences. So if you have someone that doesn't have experience with mental health and there is someone that does, whether the person may take away their right to talk about such experiences, or whether there is social expectations, and if those social expectations are not adhered to, then there could be a sense of ridicule. It also obviously ties into the sense of those that are I think it can also tie into when we're going through lows as well, and how that can be treated, can be dealt with as well. Or within social expectations, when mental health can be a thing that prevents you from doing things, then there can be the projection based on what someone else might want you to be. And that's something that I feel is something that exists within all of them, is it can be an expectation based on what the other person may want you to be, but not based on what you are saying, and not based on what you may do comfortably living and breathing as a person. So in my mind, I kind of feel like I've got everything there, but I just wanted to really add that in, because while I'm obviously learning and growing and discovering more about my own mental health, it has caused so much introspections where it makes me look at things that maybe, not maybe, but are often invisible to the general eye. And those subjects are things that I find important, and I do want to discuss it because I want there to be a huge amount of self-awareness, and I don't want there to be a continuation of pain and trauma and suffering and so on. So I do hope you like it. I hope it resonates, and thank you.